I am so thankful that God has blessed me with the privilege this morning of turning to the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes, my favorite Old Testament book. This is a great piece of work. In the next 3 weeks, I will spend the sermons that we'll skip. I'm not doing Song of Solomon. You can ask Daniel to pick that up on a Wednesday night and explain it to you. I don't have a clue what's going on in Song of Solomon, so I'm skipping and not doing Song of Solomon next week. I will actually do, for the next 3 Sundays after this, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. And that is in accordance with the elders at the last members meeting, encouraging everyone to read through 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus and be familiar with it. I know some of your Sunday school classes also have been covering the pastoral epistles, and so it's appropriate at this season in our church to just kind of think through together the pastoral epistles, and that's what I'll do in the next 3 weeks. But today, God is so gracious. He has given me the privilege of preaching my favorite Old Testament book, Ecclesiastes. I don't know how that strikes you when you hear me say that. You might think I'm a nut job. Probably you think I must be some Eeyore-type character that just walks around in a cloud of doom and gloom all the time, expecting the worst. Because if you've read the book of Ecclesiastes, you may have come to that conclusion. Many people have that opinion of Ecclesiastes. That is just a book of doom and gloom, and this guy who wrote it must have been one sad character. But he's not. He's a preacher. And I think, IMHO, if you're following along on Twitter tags, in my humble opinion, this is the consummate preacher. He has done exactly what preachers are supposed to do. He has understood God so well that he is able to take his understanding and knowledge of God into the world and explore every other idea that the world has to offer and to show it for what it is. That's what I believe he's doing in this book. This great preacher, the book is called in some titles Koheleth, because that's the word for the guy who gathers everybody together to preach. So the preacher is Koheleth, and Koheleth is, in my opinion, the consummate preacher doing a fantastic job in this book of Ecclesiastes to strengthen his people and to build up faith in all believers in God. Now, that is not the opinion you're going to get from a lot of people. If you go out looking for commentaries or you go ask people about who have read the book, they're not going to tell you that it's a great piece of literature. They're not going to tell you that, oh man, I love that book, probably. They're probably going to say something like, that guy was deranged. Or maybe they'll be kinder and say he was merely disillusioned, or simply that he was depressed. But they're going to say something negative about this guy. Every psychological malady, from just mere skepticism to schizophrenia, has been ascribed to the writer of the book of Ecclesiastes. One scholar said this of the book of Ecclesiastes: it is the book in the Bible you definitely should not read if you plan to have a positive outlook on life or existence. Stay away from Ecclesiastes if you want to wear a smile on your face, because this book is filled with doom and gloom. But I say God has preserved this book in the canon for really good reason. God has some really great purposes to accomplish in this particular book. A Roman Catholic scholar, Peter Kreeft, actually a contemporary of ours, says Ecclesiastes is the greatest of all books of philosophy. The greatest of all books of philosophy. And I hadn't thought about it in those terms before, but I do understand that it's a philosophical work, and that is why I'm drawn to it. I know that. I never thought of it as being the greatest, but then I thought, it really is. When you look at what he's done, what the writer, Koheleth, has done in this book, he accomplished a complete outworking, a systematic outworking of naturalistic philosophy 2,500 years before the great philosophers of the 20th century arrived at his conclusions. You talk about being ahead of your time. This guy was 2,500 years ahead of the curve when it comes to understanding philosophy and when it comes to understanding the implications of a naturalistic philosophy. He comes to the conclusions well in advance of modern philosophy. Great writers have recognized the worth of this book. Herman Melville, you know, the writer of Moby Dick, right? In chapter 97 of Moby Dick, Herman Melville says, the truest of all books is Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, the truest of all books, Ecclesiastes, the greatest philosophical work ever written, is here before us this morning. And I say to you, people make a major mistake when they read this book. There is no doubt that from the very first of the book all the way through the vast majority of its contents, this writer is leading the reader to despair. Over and over and over again, it's just one thing after another, and it ends in death, and it ends in despair. There's no doubt about that. The book makes that point very plainly. The problem, the reason the people don't understand this book rightly is because they fail to realize the book doesn't just make the one point, it makes 2 points. When you realize there's a second point, all of a sudden a new day dawns, a new hope appears, and a new meaning is just unlocked for this whole book and for the people of God who understand it. The first point, as I said, is unmistakably clear. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes and you don't get the idea of vanity of vanities, all is vanity and striving after the wind, if you can read this book and not get that as the point of the book, then you could probably go to the beach and never see the ocean. I mean, there's no way to miss it. It's everywhere. It's from the first verse onward. This is all over the place. Chapter 1, verse 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. And striving after the wind. Everything that's done under the sun, according to the writer, according to Koheleth, everything that's done under the sun is vanity and striving after the wind. Now, when he says everything under the sun, I believe basically that he's talking about the natural order of things. You understand that none of us would have an existence if it weren't for the sun. I know that we wear sunscreen and things to block the sun from getting to us, but really, if we could block out the sun, we would all die. We would all perish. You know, our planet is one of the however many there really are now. I don't know if Pluto's a planet or not, and so I don't know how many real planets there are, but however many they are, they all orbit around the sun and depend upon the sun for their movement. And the Earth particularly is situated in such a way that it is the only planet that's able to sustain human life, because it's the only planet precisely positioned away from the sun enough that we get heat and light from the sun, but far enough away that we don't burn to a crisp. So here, under the sun, if you were to take life at its meaning under the sun, in other words, if you are just to accept life on natural terms, if you're just to assume that, let's take God out of the equation, for example, and let's just live by natural law the way, say, an evolutionist would want us to do, and let's just look for the meaning that we have within itself, within the natural course of life. Koheleth says, okay, let's take a look and see what life is like under the sun. And this is what he does. And he says, under the sun, all is vanity. I'll show it to you in several different ways. You think wisdom is the course? Hey, we just got finished with the book of Proverbs, and we learned the value of wisdom, and we separate wisdom from folly, and we know that wisdom is the way to live, and folly is the way to die like a fool, and so we learn the way of wisdom is the way of life. And the writer of Ecclesiastes, Koheleth, says, well, let's think about wisdom, chapter 1, verses 16 to 18. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. All right, so this guy's alive. This guy has it all going on upstairs. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realized that this also is striving after wind. Because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. You want to follow the course of wisdom? Well, then you're going to go the way of misery. Wisdom, vanity. What about pleasure? Oh, I know. Man, I'm just going to go around once, so I'm going to grab all the gusto I can. I don't know if gusto's still a word in use. I remember, wasn't it a Schlitz commercial or something that told you to grab the gusto? Well, we thought it was right to grab all the gusto we could in life because you only go around once, right? So the writer Koheles says, okay, well, let's think about grabbing all the pleasure we can. Chapter 2, verse 1, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of pleasure, what does it accomplish? Verse 2 there. Okay, well, maybe then we'll just, the one with the most toys wins. Maybe that's the key. And so I'll go out and I'll get possessions and I'll pile up treasures for myself and live the life of a king and the life of luxury. Okay, so Koheles tries that. Chapter 2, starting at verse 4. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself. And I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself, from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. The dude had land. I bought male and female slaves. You can't do that. That's illegal. He did it. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. Lots of women at his disposal to do with as he pleased. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor. And this was my reward for all my labor. So he worked, and he got rewarded for his work. Thus, I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity, says the preacher, and striving after wind. Well, what about just finding joy in the work itself and not being tied to the rewards? You know, what about just saying, hey, I'm happy just to do my duty every day, and I'm happy just to get my work done and to take care of my little house and my little piece of property, and I'm not going to try to pile up rewards because I know that's vain. I know that's all vanity, so I'm just going to do my duty and find my joy in doing my duty. Okay, he says, I tried that too. And again, work itself was found wanting. It ended in vanity. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Verse 18, chapter 2, verse 18. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore, I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun. So you build up a farm, and you leave it to your kids, and your kids turn out to be idiots, and you can't do anything about it. It's vanity. You build a vineyard, and somebody buys it, and they don't understand business. And it all goes to pot. It's all vanity. What in the world can you accomplish that matters? Well, okay, so you say, I'm going to narrow this down. It's not even my duty. I'm not going to look for anything outside of myself. I'm just going to value my life. Life itself must be the key to meaning under the sun. And he says in chapter 6, starting at verse 7, all a man's labor is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does a poor man have, knowing how to walk before the living? What the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. This too is futility and striving after wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and it is known what man is. For he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he is. For there are many words which increase futility. What then is the advantage to a man? For who knows what is good for a man during his lifetime, during the few years of his futile life? He will spend them like a shadow. For who can tell a man what will be after him under the sun? Are you depressed yet? You should be. This isn't helpful. Whatever you do doesn't matter. Somebody else is going to come along and possibly screw it up. Or if they come along and make it better, then you're forgotten. Either way, you're done. Your labor has come to nothing, and you will die. Just in case you're not depressed yet, let's go to chapter 9. Verse 11, I again saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability. For time and chance overtake them all. Now, that's a fascinating word, and I don't have time to go into this very much, but some of you who have thought through some scientific issues and some of you who have studied evolution understand the significance that a naturalistic, atheistic philosophy puts on time plus chance. And here he's admitting if we're going to consider things on natural terms, then time and chance will undo everything. Every person over time will die. Whether it's, sooner or later, we all will die, and all the work of our hands will fall ultimately to time. Moreover, verse 12, man does not know his time. Like a fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare, so the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. If death has not surprised you yet, hang on. It will. It will take someone from you in an untimely way. And it doesn't matter how wealthy you are. It doesn't matter that you live in America. And it doesn't matter that you have a government-supplied health care. Or if you have your own private stash of health care. Doesn't matter. Death is going to hit you and hit your family, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, the writer concludes that life under the sun is vanity. All is vanity. Vanity of vanity. All is vanity and striving after the wind. Go outside this evening and just when you see the effects of the wind, Just start chasing it until you die. And that'll be just as meaningful as anything else you could do. Because it's going to come to nothing. Vanity of vanity, all is vanities, declares a preacher. Well, you can understand why people don't like this guy, and you can understand why people discourage the downhearted from reading this book. It's a little bit depressing. He's saying essentially that everything in life, whether it's work, whether it's your family, whether it is your accumulation of possessions, whether it's your accomplishment in doing your duty, whatever it is, he says it really is nothing more than a soap bubble. And I use that illustration because my Old Testament professor used it, and I thought it was very helpful for understanding the book of Ecclesiastes. When you think vanity, think soap bubbles. This past weekend, we were down at my sister's house, and I was trying to blow bubbles with my two little boys, right? Well, it turns out I thought I was helping them, but I wasn't even as good as they were. And none of us, me nor Jack nor Missiker, were as good as Polly. So we gave the wand over to Polly, who could make very big and very beautiful soap bubbles. But at the end of it all, it didn't matter that hers were bigger and had more colors and floated, in a more wobbly, kind of cool looking way. Didn't really matter. Because not a single one of the soap bubbles that all of us collectively made exists today. Not one of them lasted more than about 4 seconds. And those were the really good ones. And this writer is saying, if you're looking for your meaning in life, under the sun, then what you have to look forward to is nothing. Your soap bubble is going to burst someday. Probably someday soon. He takes every possible conceivable route that someone would use to find meaning under the sun, and he shows that they all lead to death and futility. This writer is not being morose or pessimistic or overly doomy and gloomy. He's actually being completely honest. He's actually taking reality for what it is and telling you the truth about reality. We might call him actually a sober-minded preacher. Koheleth is completely honest and upfront about the facts. And so he lays it all out and says, if the world really is the way, say, Eastern religions portray it, where everything just happens in cycles, it comes, it goes, it comes and goes, it ebbs, it flows, and there's nothing new under the sun, and everything that was before will be again, and this whole cycle will repeat itself ad infinitum. There will never be any point to anything in the future. There's never a place where your present actions matter for determining the future. If that's true, and if in fact we're going to take things on those terms, then we must say that nothing matters. Chapter 9, verses 2 and 3. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice, and for the one who does not sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. So, in other words, human beings are evil, wickedly insane, and then they die. And this is where you're going to look for meaning? This is where you're going to look for purpose? If you do, you be honest about the conclusion that brings you to. I told you at the beginning of the sermon that this is a great philosopher. You don't feel like he's so great right now, I understand. The reason he's so great, as I said, is because he anticipated 20th century philosophy. Let me just share with you where the 20th century went in philosophy. read from a philosophy book. This is from a famous atheistic, naturalistic philosopher who thought that the way to find reality was to move God aside and look under the sun and study the human condition and study reality under the sun, and then come to your conclusions about the meaning of life. And this is where his conclusions led him. Bertrand Russell says, "Brief and powerless is man's life. On him and all his race, the slow, sure doom falls pitiless and dark. Blind to good and evil, reckless of destruction, omnipotent matter rolls on its relentless way. For man, condemned today to lose his dearest tomorrow, himself to pass through the gate of darkness, it remains only to cherish, ere yet the blow falls, the lofty thoughts that ennoble his little day." He basically just quoted Ecclesiastes 9, 2, and 3. This is exactly the conclusion that you should come to in philosophy if you're going to attempt to understand life apart from ultimate reality. If you're going to narrow reality to this world and this life only, then do it well and get the right conclusion. Bertrand Russell did, to his credit. The writer of Ecclesiastes did 2,500 plus years ago, to the glory of God and the help of God's people. This is the first and most, at least content-wise, this is the major point of the book. But you remember we read a little passage, a little tiny piece from the end of the book. Joe read it just a moment ago. The first point is unmistakable. The second point is more subtly made. It's more easily missed. But yet, it's absolutely the most important part of the book. The little bitty piece that Joe read from the end, the last two verses of Ecclesiastes, aren't some just tacked on God statement to get the book included in the canon. You know, we do that. I told y'all we went to a graduation. Well, this graduation sort of tacked on a prayer to make the Christian people in the community happy, but it had nothing to do with God. It didn't address anyone personally and made no mention of Jesus Christ. You know, it's just kind of a tack-on thing to make people feel like it's a little bit more holy than the rest of the secular world is holy. And some people would see this little piece at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes as just a tag thrown on there so the book can stay in the Bible. And we can have a real skeptic's point of view in the Bible. No, this isn't an add-on. You know that because he specifically says in verse 13, the conclusion when all has been heard. His attempt has been, we go back a few verses and you'll see what he's actually trying to do. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered and he searched out and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. This preacher is trying to get it right. He's trying to understand things for what they really are, and he's trying to get God right. And he says, if you take things without God and consider meaning, you will find none. There will be no meaning, but only despair and futility. So the conclusion, after I have understood everything that's being taught, after I have done a thorough review of philosophy and of experience, the conclusion that I come to is this: fear God and keep His commandments. Now, we also have to be a little bit careful about how we hear that phrase, fear God and keep His commandments. Think about it like this. Let's say that we buy the first point, that we're going to live in this world, and we're going to get a job, and we're going to buy a house, and we're going to try to get a nicer car, and we're going to try to take care of our yard, but really, we've read the Bible now, so we know all that is just like a soap bubble, so it's stupid. And so we're not going to put all of our effort into that. Well, because it would just be vanity. Well, what do we put our effort into? we decide that there doesn't really seem to be a point to any of this because we're going to do it and we're going to die. If we hear the Bible teaching that and then hear this word come along and say, but fear God and obey His commandments, because the next verse says He's going to bring everything to judgment, now all of a sudden it's a piling on of despair. So not only are we living a futile life that doesn't mean anything and that it's going to end in death, but now we better obey God or we're going to go to hell and it's going to get worse afterwards. So there would be a way to hear this ending such as it would be like, okay, it's really bad now and there's vanity now, but at least there won't be vanity and then hell. And that would be the message of the book. That's not the message of the book. I wouldn't like the book if that were the message. It wouldn't be my favorite book if that were actually the message. The way to hear this is simply, if you take life in this world to be that of ultimate value, you should know that you are running the fool's course to its very end. You will end in vanity. Your life will have been spent in vain. You will have wasted your time upon the earth. Doesn't matter what you will have accumulated, you will have wasted your life and your soul. The real point of you being on the earth is to come to know God. And even though this book is filled with despair, and even though this book is filled with vanity after vanity after vanity, do you know that the truth about the book is all throughout the writer has been calling people to God and showing them that the real truth abides in the living God. Get to know Him and you will find out the key to living in this world, and you will escape the vanity of life under the sun. He has spoken all throughout this book of God. God, the Creator, in chapter 3, verse 11. God has made everything appropriate in its time. He also has set eternity in man's heart so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. He puts it in our heart to be hungry, to know that there's got to be a reality beyond the sun. We have to be able to live beyond the sun. And God has put that in our hearts to spark us to curiosity, to learn, to increase in knowledge, and to increase in wisdom until we know the goodness of God, until we know Him as Redeemer, and until we learn to fear Him and obey Him rightly, and therefore live in this world a full and abundant life. God is pictured as Creator. He is pictured as sovereign. Go down chapter 3, verse 14. I know that everything God does will remain forever. So there's your escape from vanity. There is nothing to add to it, and there's nothing to take from it, for God has so worked that men should fear Him. He has put all this in place so that we'll know that if we attempt to do this on our own, apart from knowledge of God, we will end in futility. But once we put God in His place and recognize Him for who He is, all of a sudden we know every bit of it makes sense. And every bit of this reality is working together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose, to quote the Apostle Paul. This world is the way it is, not because it is inherently futile. The world is the way it is because there is sin in our hearts. There is sin in humankind. You can see that in chapter 7. Verse 29, Behold, I have found only this, that God made men upright, but they have sought out many devices. Again in chapter 8, verse 9, All this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. The reality is, this world is a world cursed by sin in the heart of men and by death. The curse is found in many places. I'll take you back to chapter 2, verse 11. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity, and striving after the wind. There was no profit under the sun, because there is a curse. Chapter 4, verse 3. I added the curse statement, but that's the implication. Chapter 4, verse 3, but better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. The evil activity is done by men. It's done by us, against one another, and against God. That's the curse of this world. It's the curse that comes from sin and ends in death. And we read a moment ago from chapter 9, how we saw it there as well. Chapter 9, verse 3, this is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterward, they go to the dead. Sin and death. Sin and death. This world appears to be vain. It appears to be meaningless. It appears to be, as the atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell put it, it appears to be omnipotent matter rolling on its relentless way, stealing us from us every tomorrow. But it only appears that way because we have ruled out from the beginning the living God, who has a redemptive purpose for life under the sun. And if we can go beyond the sun to the creator and sustainer of the sun and the moon and the stars and all things, maybe we could find a purpose for life. Maybe we could find what we hear at the end of the book, that there is, in fact, a point to all of this. That God is the one who is working everything for his good. God is the one who knows the difference between good and evil. He knows the difference between the one who walks in the righteous way and will live forever and the one who will go the way of the world and end in death. He knows how to make proper judgments, and he has made them for us so that we don't have to guess between what is good and what is bad. We don't have to guess between what gives life and what takes life away, because God is the one who knows all of this and has revealed it to his people. Therefore, get to know him. Get to learn his ways. Get to trust and obey him, and you will avoid the void. You will find meaning. In other words, this whole book is actually a call to faith. This book is a call for you and me to believe that this world is not all there is. That there's something more for us to have. And God is speaking to us. He's put it in our hearts. He has set eternity in our hearts. And he's telling us, now listen and learn the way of life. And you will escape the futility of death. This is the point of the book. It is a great, great book because it really doesn't leave you with very many options. Namely, it leaves you with one option. Fear God and obey him. That's the only choice. That's the only way to get out alive. Fear God and obey him. So, if that's true, go back to chapter 9, verse 10. Learn from God how you're supposed to live in this world. Learn the way of obedience. And whatever your hand finds to do, chapter 9, verse 10, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you're going. In other words, while you're alive, you live for God. And if you're unwilling to do that, your only other option is Sheol. Your only other option is death. Why not rather learn the way of Christ? Why not rather obey him? Do everything he says, and whenever he says do something, do it with all your might. If you were to live that way, you would find true meaning under the sun. You would find the way of life and escape the way of death. And this is what this writer is desperately pleading with you to understand. There is no future for you in the present course that you're living. If you're living apart from obedience to Jesus Christ, then you need to reread the first 11 and a half chapters of this book and understand that this writer is not playing games with your soul. He's wanting to save you from death. He's wanting to save you from vanity and lead you to life and ultimate reality. It's available for you under the sun if you will believe Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and obey him. This is the way to move forward from the book of Ecclesiastes. He, I know, lived between 500 and 1,000 years probably before Jesus Christ came, but he was pointing to Jesus the whole way to give meaning under the sun. God spoke with power in the person of Jesus Christ. Now, do you believe Jesus? Or will you continue to live a desperate lie that leads to death? This is the way the book leaves us, and I love it because it's that plain. Father, don't leave us in the despair of Ecclesiastes chapters 1 through 11. I pray, Father, that you would deliver us through this great writer, this preacher, philosopher, theologian. I pray that you would use this word to stir our souls to seek meaning in Christ. Father, I know, and I'm sure many of us can relate, there is a reality that we see, and it's been true in our own lives, where sin so blinds us and overtakes us that we think there's no other way. We think it has to go this one particular way, and there's no way out. And yet, the way out is so simple. Fear God and keep his commandments. Teach our hearts to be more afraid of you and more afraid of dishonoring you, God, than we are afraid of the opinions of other people. Teach us to be more afraid of you than we are afraid of losing our favorite sins. Teach us and empower us in your Holy Spirit to step away from futility, to step away from vanity, and take a step toward obedience, which is the way of life under the sun. Lead us to life. In Jesus' name, amen. May God bless you to respond as you've heard his word this morning. As our musicians come, this is a time for you to respond, and I pray the Lord would lead you. If you want to come and pray with me, I'll be here at the front. I'll talk to you afterwards. Daniel will be glad to talk with you afterwards, or Joe, or any of us would love to talk with you afterwards more about what it means to obey God or follow Jesus. But this is the way forward. This is the way out of futility and out of a meaningless life. May God bless you with an abundant life indeed in Christ Jesus. Would you stand? as our men come forward to receive our offering, remind you of two things. Number one, this offering is a service of worship, and you are free to give gladly and joyfully as the Lord puts on your heart. None of us will be out there spying on you or anything, but God, just give gladly so the gospel goes to the ends of the earth. And the second thing, if I could just plead with you, there is sinking sand, which leads to despair in a meaningless life, or there is Christ.